You, Dr. Thomas. My name is Angus Bahar. I am an associate professor and chair of the Department of Social Sciences at City Colleges of Chicago. Currently, I'm serving as the president of the association. And good afternoon. I'm also great to welcome you all, our first seminar. And thank you for planning today to join us. I will be moderating the discussion today. I would like to welcome Professor Kidane, and but before we go to the presentation, I would like to bring Dr. Mahari, professor at Iowa State University, and currently serving as the director of the editorial team, to briefly introduce the association. Dr. Mahari.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Can someone make me a host so I could present?
Yes.
Saleh?
Go ahead. You're a co-host.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Angusam, for introducing to the audience. So I was asked to present a brief introduction about the Association of Eritrean Studies and the journal that the association administers. It's Eritrean Studies Journal. On behalf of all the board members of the association and the editorial team, I'm presenting this today at this special seminar session. I have put a brief agenda, first introduction, and talking about the Association of the Eritrean Studies and the Eritrean Studies Journal. I just want to give a very highlight. So one of the drive for us to gather and prepare for association that would also administer a journal is globally, we have seen a lot of scientific outputs. In this case, the gross domestic expenditure, especially if you look at China, it has been, growing rapidly. Similarly, in any publication, scientific products that comes out from China have what similar parallel paths to the expenditure. If we also look at the trend in African countries that produce scientific journals, it's also increasing. The highest rate is coming from South Africa. So what we look at is, how is it relevant to us and how do we catch up? So that's really the main motivation for us to gather and create an association and a journal. Historically, however, there were associations and journals about Eritrea. I just want to give a brief historical perspective of it. To the literature review I did, I found 3 journals. Journal of Eritrean Studies used to be administered by the Research and Information Center. It was published from 1986 to 1991. And then there was another journal, it's called Eritrean Studies Review, that was the most recent, at least in North America. It used to be administered by the Eritrean Studies Association. I do believe that the last publication was from 2007. There was also another journal that used to be administered from the College of Arts and Social Sciences at Asmara University in Eritrea. The name of it was Journal of Eritrean Studies. So historically, there were, journals about Eritrea. The association, at least in North America, was the Eritrean Studies Association. So there hasn't been any active work since 2012 by the Eritrean Studies Association and the review, the Eritrean Review Journal. So we want to maintain the momentum to continue the efforts that was done by prior associations and journals. So Association of Eritrean Studies had its bylaws. It was reviewed and approved last year in June 2020. The AAC is established and registered in the state of Illinois. Board members were created, mainly from the founding members, and a working group for the journal Eritrean Studies Journal was established in July 2020. The purpose of AES is to serve scholarly and scientific endeavors to accomplish the following purposes: promote scholarly research on Eritrea and its surrounding regions, serve as a forum for scholarly endeavors on issues related to Eritrea, publish and produce an up-to-date research results, organize forums, conferences, social media events to stimulate and disseminate scientific knowledge, and also support members by providing platform for networking. So this is a copy of part of the bylaws of the association. So one of the platforms that the association work is to administer the journal. So the journal has three focus areas: humanities and social studies that include political science, education, business, and economics, science, engineering, data sciences, public health, and medical science. This is a little bit in detail, a little bit detailed PowerPoint, but I think the main focus is our goal is to publish semi-annually online and in print. That focuses on original journal, peer-reviewed research contribution. In the
Mahari, sorry, unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, Mahari.
yeah, sorry, yeah. Did I? Do you know where did I stop? Hello.
You were talking about the focus group. The focus. There you go.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know how I mute myself, but the journal adheres to a high standards of excellence, scholarly works. It's going to work on a thematic areas, mainly the following three. And the aim and scope of the journal is to publish semi-annually, online and in print. The imprint might be for special sessions. We have not, defined exactly how to manage both the imprint and online, but it will publish original, peer-reviewed research contributions on a multidisciplinary scientific research and practices in the areas of humanities and social sciences, advances in technology, engineering, data science and informatics, and public health and medical sciences. It's all towards, about Eritrea, addressing Eritrean challenges in humanities and social sciences, a better advancement of human, social, economic values of Eritrea. We welcome scientific findings, both from Eritrea and the rest of the world. I thank you. If there are any questions and answers, if you have suggestions, I'll be open to take them. I may answer them, or I'll take note for the group discussion in our next regular meeting. And I thank you for giving me opportunity to introduce the association and the journal at this venue.
Thank you, Mahari. Dr. Angosom, Amit Gibaramo, you can.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mahari. I was going to say the topics, today's topic serves this special seminar very well. This topic is not any topic, not everyday topic, where scholars display and deliver issues and ideas and concepts. Rather, the topic deals with the tragic situation that has been plaguing the people of the Horn, especially Eritrean and Tigray, going on for several months now, and it looks unabated. This poses a great concern for the region and the people of goodwill worldwide. At this point, I'm not going to even to try to explain the meaning and the magnitude of the problem. The conflict looks like is out of control. So allow me to briefly bring the speaker. Professor Kidane is not new to this area of talk. He has decades of research, work, and teaching experience dealing with conflicts and intervention. His accomplishments comprise of teaching, presentations, publications, should I say also intellectual activism. To save us time, I am not going to go into detail of his resume. I would rather look at the short version of his long list of successful academic life and his commitment to activism. And briefly, he's never shy or silent to stand on the side of justice. He's a professor of African Studies and Political Science from Penn State University, and his focus of his current research includes relevance of traditional institutions in Africa's governance, socioeconomic implication of expansion and extractive industries and commercial farming in Africa, and alternative approaches to democratization in the African continent. He's an author and an editor of several books and a long list of articles published and cited. To mention a few of his books, is The Horn of Africa, Hotspots in Global Politics from 2015. He co-edited a book, Traditional Institutions in Contemporary African Governance. Is in press now and currently working on a book titled Alternative Approaches to Democratization. I'm really looking for this one. I can't wait to read such kind of book. And now, without further ado, let me bring you Dr. Kidane to the floor, to the Zoom, to the stage.
Thank you.
Dr. Kidane, we are all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Angosom, for that exaggerated introduction. Also, thank you for putting photograph of mine when I was much younger. So sorry to disappoint you, those who are expecting a young man. But let me put some slides that would make it a bit easier for us. If I can find it. No. I think it is. Okay. All right, so to start with, I think we can classify interventions of countries into two categories. By the way, intervention is simply an instrument of foreign policy. And we can talk about intervention for national interest. And national interest, of course, includes many things such as security, territorial integrity, resource claims, power and prestige, strategic benefits, preempting proxy intervention by others, and also to punish neighboring countries for hosting opposition forces or to punish vulnerable old enemies. I think you can't see these slides, right? So the reason countries, one reason or main reason why countries intervene is to advance national interests. Another reason probably or often happens is what you call regime interest. And oftentimes also national interest is very difficult to define. Who defines it is also a very important issue. Oftentimes what happens is leaders present their own interests as national interest. So it becomes confusing to ordinary people. For instance, if a country is intervening because its national interests are at play, or if it is simply regimes have interests that they want to pursue. When I talk about Eritrean intervention in Tigray or possibly intervention in the Sudan-Ethiopia border skirmishes, I will be asking the question of, is this national interest driven or is it regime interest driven? I will look at the intervention from these two lenses, so to speak. So in any case, my brief talk would address 4 questions. One is—
Kidane, if you don't mind, I have a slide mode to go, bro. Slide mode, if possible.
to enlarge it.
No, the slide mode, it says slideshow.
Yeah.
If you hit that, it will go like in slideshow. Hit the slideshow.
Yeah, the 4 questions I want to address is, one is if there is national interest for Eritrea, if there is national interest in Eritrea's intervention in Tigray and possibly in Sudan. I will not talk much about Sudan since it is still a contested claim. But I will address the issue, is the intervention in Tigray driven by Eritrea's national interest? If the intervention is to advance regime interests, what are those interests? What might be the interests the regime is expecting to advance? The third question is, what are the costs for Eritrea from this intervention? And finally, the question is, what is expected? What is the duration of the intervention? Is it open-ended? And can we expect an end to this intervention? That's another issue that I will briefly touch on. With respect to the first one, the national interest in Eritrea's intervention, of course, Eritrea is a country that has been in war for a long time, and it is a country that is war fatigued. And why is it involved in this conflict, civil war of a neighboring country? Is there a credible threat to its security from the TPLF? For instance, the government claims that the TPLF is a threat to Eritrea's national interest. Well, to me, that I don't find that to be very credible, because the TPLF out of power, meaning once it lost power in Ethiopia, the TPLF was not in a position to be a major threat to Eritrea. In fact, it attempted to resolve its conflicts with Eritrea to at least make Eritrea neutral, if nothing else. And under threat from the rest of Ethiopia or from the federal government of Ethiopia, I don't think that the TPLF was in a real position to be a threat to Eritrea's intervention at that particular time, at the time Eritrea decided to intervene. Then there is the question, was Eritrea trying to regain lost territory? And of course, it has regained lost territory, the Badme and those that were assigned to Eritrea by the Boundary Commission. But the question is, was intervention necessary to achieve that? Was there commitment of defense pact with Ethiopia? In other words, was there a treaty between Ethiopia and Eritrea for mutual defense? And if there was such a pact or such an agreement, does it apply to civil wars? In other words, is it a pact at the level of countries, or is it a pact at the level of regimes? If it is a regime pact, then of course even civil wars would be applying. But if it is a country, then of course you can't support a part of the country because you have a pact. So that makes also a difference. So to me then, I don't find the TPLF to be a credible threat to Eritrea's national security after it lost power in 2018. When it was in power in Ethiopia, it could, and it had the power to be a threat. But after it lost power in Ethiopia and retreated to Tigray, then of course, and was under pressure from the federal government. At that point, I doubt that the TPLF was a major threat to Eritrea. Of course, we can disagree on this. This is my interpretation of the situation. But with the intervention, of course, Eritrea, as I said, has regained the territory that was assigned to it by the Boundary Commission. But again, Ethiopia in 2018 has already signed the cooperation agreement to respect the decision by the Boundary Commission. So without intervention, Eritrea could have demanded that Ethiopia implement the agreement, the Friendship and Cooperation Agreement of 2018. That would have tested Ethiopia if actually the transfer of the territory could be achieved without any conflict. Now, the other question that can be asked is, the federal government was committed to returning the territory to Eritrea, but the TPLF could be an obstacle to implementing this treaty. That is an important question. Was the TPLF really opposing the federal government's Friendship and Cooperation Agreement? In other words, would Ethiopia be hindered from returning the territories to Eritrea because of opposition by the TPLF? Was there such a strong opposition by the TPLF? Then again, this relates to whether the TPLF was in a position to be a threat to Eritrea or not. Because did it really have the power to prevent the federal government from implementing the Friendship and Cooperation Agreement of 2018? Now, of course, we would not know the answers to these questions because Eritrea did not demand implementation of the Boundary Commission's decision. So therefore, we really don't know. We don't have empirical evidence to say whether the TPLF would have objected or would have attempted to impede implementation or not. So I think Eritrea could have tested the waters and demand implementation before deciding whether intervention was actually necessary for regaining the territory. There is some rhetoric, of course, nowadays we read in the in different YouTube videos that some TPLF members talking about Eritrean net itself being an enemy to Tigray or a threat to Tigray, etc., etc. But how credible are those analysis by individuals? And anyways, Ethiopia has worse rhetoric because there are many Ethiopian activists who claim that Assad is Ethiopian and Ethiopia should get Assad, etc., etc. So there is also a rhetoric of dismembering Eritrea on the Ethiopian side. So it's hard to take seriously since it was not an official state or government or regional government position whether Eritrea is a threat to Tigray or not. Now, how about if we cannot find credible and arguments for national interest, then the alternative is to think about whether the intervention was driven by regime interest and what would be possible interests for the regime. Well, one can think of elevated clout. So the Eritrean regime, which was isolated for a long time now, has this ability to play a significant role in the politics of the Horn of Africa. So elevated clout within Ethiopian politics for the regime, also within the Greater Horn politics is one important possibility that probably is an ambition by the Eritrean leadership. Then there is also a possibility to see this intervention as regime alliance between the Ethiopian regime and the Eritrean regime. And this could be for securing their incumbencies in power. In other words, if the Ethiopian regime is threatened, Eritrea would intervene to secure the regime in Ethiopia. And we can also expect if the Eritrean regime is threatened, Ethiopia could also be intervening in Eritrean affairs in order to preserve the regime and security of the regime. So in other words, this could be an alliance between regimes rather than an alliance between countries. So that's a possible goal for the regime. A third possibility is, and often people talk about this one, it is a vendetta against the TPLF, what the TPLF did during the border war, and also what the TPLF did to keep Eritrea under a situation of no war, no peace, bleeding Eritrea to death very slowly. And of course, many Eritreans would be very angry about what the TPLF did by refusing to accept the demarcation and keeping this no war, no peace situation, knowing fully well that Eritrea would be the country to suffer because of its limited human resources. And of course, the open-ended military service of Eritrea's youth and so on and so on. But again, vendetta is not a national interest. National interest is looking forward to see what are the benefits for Eritrea in the future. not what Eritrea's enemies did to us in the past, because there is no national interest to be gained by vendetta. So maybe it is a psychological pleasure for the regime derived from the misery of the TPLF, but vendetta does not advance national interest. And from this point of view, I think the rationale to see national interest in this intervention is very limited. Again, with the Sudan, Eritrea was flirting in terms of intervention with the Sudan. The Sudanese were claiming that Eritrean troops were amassed in the boundary, attempting or trying to support Ethiopian fighters, etc., etc. Eritrea, on its part, attempted, I think, to ensure the Sudanese regime that its troops would not intervene on the side of Ethiopia. And the Sudanese response was practically, we don't believe you, we will believe it when we see it. So therefore, they weren't convinced that Eritrea would not intervene on the side of Ethiopia against Sudan. But that is a situation that is fluid, not very clear evidence. But in any case, the argument is the same. If Eritrea was to intervene on the side of Ethiopia against Sudan, there wouldn't be national interest for Eritrea. It would only be regime interest. Now, how long is this intervention to last? Is it open-ended? Now, the argument from the Ethiopian government and from the Eritrean regime is that the TPLF is not the same as the people of Tigray. In other words, our enemy is the TPLF and not the people of Tigray. Can we credibly separate the TPLF from the people of Tigray? Could we possibly separate the EPLF or the ALF from the Eritrean population? So, in other words, these are arguments that regimes adopt in an effort to legitimize their activities. But I think they are fighting the people of Tigray and not simply the TPLF. And to the extent that the people of Tigray consider the TPLF to be their leader, then of course the war is against Tigray rather than just the TPLF. How long is this intervention to last? How long is this war going to last? Indications are this war can be intractable. It's not going to end quickly. And even if the war ends, Ethiopia is not going to be stable for a long time. I point that Ethiopia is facing triple crisis presently. And this crisis is, of course, they have major divisions with respect to how the country is to be governed. The vision of governance in Ethiopia, there is no consensus on vision of how the country is to be governed. Some people like the federal arrangement as it is, ethnic-based federal arrangement. Some argue that federal arrangement on the basis of provinces or something else, but not on on ethnic basis. Some people argue that the country is better off in a semi-unitary state rather than a federal system. So in other words, the political elite in Ethiopia have not yet reached a consensus on how the country is to be governed. So therefore, until they resolve that problem, the country is going to remain unstable, regardless of what happens to the war in Tigray. And the war in Tigray, by the way, is an extension of that division of vision. Then there is, of course, the other problem. The regional states in Ethiopia all have boundary problems. Tigray have boundary problems with Amhara. Afar have boundary problems with the Somali state. Benishangul has boundary problems with the Amhara. The Oromo have boundary problems with the Somalis, etc., etc. Now, the present federal entities have these chronic boundary problems. Not only boundary problems, they also have ethnic problems, a third crisis. If you are a Tigrayan or a Oromo in Amhara state, you would be discriminated. If you look at the constitutions of the regional states, minorities who are non-indigenous minorities, meaning people who are living outside of their of the territory of their ethnic group. If you are an Amhara living in Oromia, you don't have rights, citizenship rights within Oromia. So in other words, they have a conflict. The constitution of the country gives you national citizenship, but the regional states deprive you of national citizenship because you are living outside of your home territory, so to speak. So these are creating all sorts of conflicts in Ethiopia. And these conflicts have also the potential to lead to genocidal situations in Ethiopia. Because it's entirely possible the Oromos could engage in ethnic cleansing of Amharas from their Oromia. In other words, they see the Amharas as Naftaniyas who came during the invasion of Oromia by the Amharas and so on and so on. And it's entirely possible that they can be engaged in ethnic cleansing. The Amharas are already engaged in ethnic cleansing within Western Tigray and the Humura and other areas. But it's not only the Amhara and the Tigray that are engaged in this ethnic cleansing. The entire Ethiopia could be engaged in ethnic cleansing as long as the regional states have this discriminatory practice against non-indigenous minorities. So in other words, what I'm saying is Ethiopia is going to remain unstable until it resolves all this crisis that I pointed out. And and the Tigray war is not likely to end. Even if it ends, the three crises that I pointed out in Ethiopia are likely to remain. So what does Eritrea's intervention mean then? How long is Eritrea going to be in Tigray? And the longer it stays, of course, the more the costs are for Eritrea. That's why I'm asking this question. So what are Eritrea's costs from this intervention? One, of course, human life. Young Eritreans are forced to die in this war that that's not their concern. So that's a major concern, a major cost. The costs of COVID. This war exposed Eritrea to more COVID infections when the country is vulnerable and not in a position to be to protect its citizens. Then we have the plight of the refugees that were in various camps in Tigray. Then, of course, the financial costs. Who is paying for this intervention in Tigray? Is Ethiopia paying for it, or is Eritrea paying for this intervention? We don't know, but it is a cost to Eritrean society. The costs to the reputation of the country as a result of the claims of war crimes and human rights violations and so on. That's not going to go away very quickly. Then there is the cost of Eritrea's good neighborliness with Tigray in the long run. The war effort is also probably diverting resources from development. Any anticipated economic benefits to Eritrea from close friendship with Ethiopia is not going to materialize as long as the war is there, and the war does not seem to be likely to end quickly. So in other words, Eritrea does not have much benefits, but it is costing the Eritrean society dearly. And we don't see national interests that led to this intervention. Rather, what we see is intervention motivated by regime interests. At least that's how I view it. Any one of us could disagree. This is my own interpretation. We can discuss these issues later on. And the question that lastly I want to address is, what regime interests dictate policy instead of national interest? And this, of course, depends on what kind of political system you have in the country. There is no checks and balances and accountability in the structures of the Eritrean state. In other words, if I go to the next slide, if the green and the blue in the middle is what I call the state. And this is because you have the executive, you have the legislature by L, you have the judiciary by J, and then you have the military, bureaucracy, constitutional court, electoral authority, central bank, auditor general, etc., etc.
Dr. Kidane,
Organizations collectively is what we call the state. And if you have a system that has checks and balances, what this means is power is shared by all these different organizations. In a normally functioning democracy building state.
Here's the slide. The slide is not working. Slide stuck in a low. Can you move what Gabro? Up slide 4 Allah.
Yeah.
Oh, slide 4 on purpose. Okay.
But we can't see it.
Do you see the diagram?
No.
We don't see it. Slide 4 is Allah still. Up slide 4 second Allah. Stick up to your
Slide
object.
4.
Yeah. Objects of the brief presentations.
Whoa, I'm sorry. Why didn't you tell me so? I've gone so.
No, I told you it was on purpose.
No, it's not on purpose. I'm trying. Why? Okay, let me see why this is not working.
There you go. Okay. Now chart and react. Yeah.
All right.
Now we can see.
Now we can see it.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So if you look at the inner circle,
From the last.
the blue one, you have L for the legislative organ of the state. You have J, the judiciary, and then you have E, the executive. But outside, the green ones are also part of the state. The green ones, the constitutional court, the central bank, the bureaucracy, electoral authority, the military, and so on. All this collectively is what we call the state. Now, if you are going to have a state that is accountable, then power is shared by all of them. Each one of them has their own responsibility. The legislature makes laws. The executive does not make laws, okay? The judiciary is the one that looks at what happens when the law is not followed. The constitutional court is the one that interprets the constitution, etc., etc. In other words, they are autonomous in their sphere of responsibility. That means power is distributed among the different organizations of the state. If you have that, then you have what you call accountability. Each one of them keeps the other accountable. Okay? Separation of powers. Power is separated into each of these organizations, and each one keeps the other accountable. Now, in the Eritrean state, we don't have this business of accountability. There is no structure of accountability. Everything is concentrated in the hands of the executive. And within the executive, it might be concentrated in the hands of one individual. So in other words, it becomes very easy for the regime to follow its own regime interests because there is no one to keep it accountable. No one could have asked the government, why are we interfering in Tigray? That's against national interest. Because power is concentrated, we don't have a mechanism of checks and balances, and we don't have, so there is no separation between government and the state in Eritrea. There is also no separation between the regime and the state. Under these circumstances, the regime is practically free to do whatever it, to intervene or to do whatever policy it wants. There is no need the regime to inform the population because nobody keeps it accountable. Under these circumstances, then it's very easy for regimes to follow or to intervene to advance regime interests rather than national interests. In fact, when we talk about Eritrea and we talk about Eritrean citizens, Eritrea does not have citizenship. Because citizenship is the ability to participate in the political, economic, social, and cultural life of one's country. If the population is not participating, then what is the difference between the Eritrean population under the current regime and the Eritrean population under the Italian colonial regime? Yeah. That ability to participate is not there. That's what makes citizens. If you are a citizen of the United States, you can vote, you can participate in the political process, you can even run for office, you can start business, participate in the economy, participate in cultural and social life. If you cannot do that, then of course you are not a citizen of the United States. That's as simple as that. Citizenship is the right to participate. Now, if you are not practicing that right of citizens participating in this economic, political, and social life of the country, then of course you don't have citizenship. You don't have citizenship rights. I think my perspective is the UN and all the human rights groups talk about Eritrea violating human rights. The question is, Eritrea does not have the basis for maintaining human rights because it doesn't have citizenship granted yet. And as long as, so for instance, we talk about the open-ended national service being like slavery and et cetera, et cetera. Well, there is no one to tell the government or to prevent the government's decision to make it open-ended. There is no representation of the population. I talked about earlier about what treaty between Ethiopia and Eritrea is a national treaty or simply regime agreements. Well, Eritrea doesn't have any obligation, or the Eritrean regime does not have any obligation to tell its population what the treaty is. The population does not have a national assembly that can ask the question, what is its essence? Why is it to our national interest, et cetera, et cetera. So in other words, from the Eritrean point of view, the regime is, power is concentrated in the regime and the regime does whatever it sees fit. So my conclusion then is that we don't have the basis for popular participation. We don't have a national assembly that represents the interests of the people. And we don't have the checks and balances within the state. So therefore, if the government decides national service is indefinite forever, then that's what happens. If the regime decides to intervene, that's what happens, because there is no National Assembly that can say what is our national interest here. So I guess to summarize, what I'm saying is the intervention does not seem to be motivated by national interest. It's very difficult to show national interest for Eritrea in this intervention. In that case, then the intervention is primarily derived by interest, and the regime is able to follow its own interests because there is no system of accountability and so on. So our basic problem is not, the intervention is merely symptomatic that Eritrea does not have citizenship and citizenship rights and accountable governance. And as long as that is the case, then of course the regime can also take any policies that it might see fit for itself. I think I will stop here, and I'm sure you may have lots of questions or lots of disagreements, and we can discuss them. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Can you go to the last slide, the final slide, the conclusion slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is just to show you this, what we call the state is, the blue normally we call government,
Mm-hmm.
the green that are the other organizations of the state, such as the, if you look at the United States, for instance, you see the Constitutional Court, the Supreme Court is independent. Okay, the president does not tell what the Supreme Court does. The president does not tell what the bank does. So in most countries that are attempting to democratize, what you have is the different organizations of the state are autonomous within their responsibility. And because they are autonomous, then they can maintain checks and balances. They can tell the regime, no, you can't do that. The law does not allow you to do that. And if you violate human rights, there would be the courts that would defend citizens, etc., etc. We don't have that mechanism in the Eritrean state. Okay, and because we don't have that mechanism, we don't have respect for citizenship rights. And because we don't have citizenship rights, we cannot participate in the governance. We cannot that the government tells the population and asks the National Assembly to ratify any treaties with foreign countries. So the regime does everything what it wishes to do, not even obligated to inform the population, let alone ask them to rectify agreements. And intervention is the same thing. If the regime wants to intervene in Sudan, there is to stop it.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Now we can you move the slides, Desale?
The slides is
Yeah.
Dr. Kidane move to Governor Zalo.
Yeah, I will remove them.
Okay, well, so what we have now is questions from the audience, and I would like to remind everybody that since we have limited time, you make your questions brief and or making a statement, and Dr. Kidane will respond to questions. Is it within the presentation? I gave us a very complicated and complex topic and situation has been probably for some of us simplified and much more easier to understand. Though some of them are his perspective and he can challenge. So and Desale was looking at the names and the order. So we can start with the first one. Desale, do you have?
Yeah, just basically, if you have any questions, you can raise your hands and then I can tell Dr. Angosom. But so far, I don't see any raised hand. So like when you see your name, just you can raise a hand. There's an option there. I don't see. But what we have is from the chat, Berhane, he asked a question. Is it a comment or a question? What he said is the Higdef regime is not unelected, or legal government. Therefore, does HIGDEF has any authority to take or claim any action for the national interest? That's a question from Brahani.
Yeah, it's not elected. And does it have an obligation? Well, today, yes, it does have an obligation, even if it is not elected, because it claims it is representing Eritrea.
Dr. Kidane, you consciously or you plan that way. You didn't bring the international community to the game. The intervention matters to international community, small and big. And we see now the European Union, the UN, the US, and international human rights groups. They all are involved. But I would like to know how do you measure the implications for the international community as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't touch on the international community. It seems like the international community, or what we call international community, is divided. The Western countries, Europe and the US, are putting pressure on Ethiopia as well as Eritrea. They are calling for Eritrean troops to withdraw, and not only Eritrean troops, but also the Amhara militia or the Amhara forces to withdraw. But China and Russia are standing behind Ethiopia, and they are claiming that this is an internal matter, and so therefore the international community does not have any right to participate or to put pressure on Ethiopia. And so under this condition,
Hey, how are you?
Under these conditions,
Hey,
with the,
Miriam, how are you?
Hold on.
Can you meet him? Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, under these conditions, one can ask the question: is the international community really able to do much to force Eritrean troops out of Tigray, for instance? They might put sanctions and that kind of thing, but Eritrea has survived sanctions for about a decade. Another one is not likely to matter that much. Would Ethiopia stop the war and negotiate as a result of pressure from the West and sanctions? It's possible, but I'm not very optimistic. And the reason is because as soon as the Western countries impose any sanctions, I think the country is going to rely more and more on China and Russia and so on. They're already meeting with these two powers. So in other words, I'm not saying that the pressure from the European countries and the US is useless, but I'm not persuaded that they will do much more than what they are doing, to the point that Ethiopia will come to the negotiating table, or at least Eritrea withdraws its troops.
No, thank you.
Yeah, there is one question from Muzit.
Go ahead, Muzit.
Okay, I can read it or she can ask it. So
She can ask it if she wants.
she put it already in the chat message. Maybe I can.
Oh, she did?
Muzit, are you?
Hi, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Hi. Thank you so much for your time. Hello, everyone. So the question I had was, you mentioned that diagram of the state structure that US is under. So I'm wondering, are there other state structures that are similar to that of Eritreas that have shown progress in moving towards citizenship rights within their own structure. So something different than having a separation of power. And I'm asking this to see if Eritrea can work towards, citizen participation, as I mentioned, without adopting the same structure as the US. So if there's a way to work towards that, because I feel like we're a long way from going towards what the US has, but something similar.
Yeah, I think this issue of ensuring citizenship rights is tied to the issue of democratization. Of course, I gave the example of the United States, which is much more advanced in democratization than many African countries. Many African countries before 1991, before the end of the Cold War, were also single party systems, and they were perhaps not as rigid as Eritrea is, but citizenship rights were limited. But I think African countries are beginning to democratize, although the process seems to be stalled, at least since the end of the Cold War. They have introduced multi-party systems. They have liberalized the press, and they have adopted some of the institutions of democracy. Now, they are very fragile, and some countries have not made progress beyond this issue of allowing parties to compete, but they also do not allow opposition parties to actually be a threat to the dominant parties. So if you look in the Horn of Africa, for instance, they conduct elections, but except Kenya, there is no Horn of Africa country where power was transferred as a result of elections. In other words, they conduct these elections, but they are sure that the dominant parties would win. And so what I'm saying is they have adopted some of the institutions of democracy, unlike Eritrea. Eritrea has not accepted any of them yet. So Eritrea is an extreme situation. Beyond Eritrea, I think if we are going to look at other examples, we have to go to South Sudan. Okay? And Somalia, of course, Somalia, which is always in a civil war crisis. Even within Africa, where democracy is sort of at the initial stages and maybe even stalling, Eritrea still is an exception, an extreme case in the sense that it doesn't even recognize the right of the population to form political parties, the right of free press, elections, and so on. So if you ask me, Eritrea is an exception. Perhaps in our region, a country that comes close to Eritrea is South Sudan.
Thank you.
Yeah, the next question seems to be why the African Union failed to bring pressure on the war in Tigray. The AU has more relevance and significance in this matter, especially since Ethiopia has a legacy of African diplomacy. I think one of the reasons is, of course, Ethiopia is the site of the African Union, and African diplomats are very, 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 how should I say it, timid in terms of putting pressure on Ethiopia. It is very difficult to explain, but the African Union has really, it does have principles. It talks about even not recognizing regimes that come to power through military coups, etc., etc. But when they do, they don't ostracize them, or they. So, for instance, any country that has any regime that comes to power through non-electoral mechanism is to be expelled from the African Union. But when Egypt conducted a coup, the Al-Sisi regime, they haven't done anything about it. They couldn't implement it. So even if they talk about, or I think against the war in Tigray by Ethiopia, there is really very little that they can do, which is tangible. So basically your question is, why don't they talk? Particularly since the US and the European Union have are beginning to put some pressure on Ethiopia. Why doesn't the African Union join in? I think the African Union is very, very, very careful not to offend Ethiopia, which is the site of their headquarters. Otherwise, it's very. The African Union never really said anything about the condemning Ethiopia, about the war in Eritrea, war of independence, or the border war, etc., etc. So the African diplomats are very careful in the case of Ethiopia. They don't want to offend the regime in Ethiopia.
Okay, thank you. There are two people raised their hands, Johannes and then Samson. So Johannes, you can go ahead.
All right, thank you, Desala. My question is a little bit straightforward. During the intervention of Eritrean troops in Tigray, we have seen a kind of division in justice seeker, especially those who are in the diaspora. There is it's a little bit some kind of an opinion division because they don't have that much good good approach toward TPLF. Some of them they have better. So how do we deal with this problem that we have within the justice seeker community? Thank you.
Yeah, basically, we don't hear much opposition to the intervention inside Eritrea. There might be, but people are very careful for obvious reasons, and we don't know what groups, if any, are opposed to the, or at least express their opposition to the intervention. That's very difficult in Eritrea. Within the diaspora, there is some division. There are those people that argue that the TPLF was, of course, an enemy to Eritrea because of the border war and the issue of the no war, no peace situation, which was deliberately adopted in order to bleed Eritrea to death, really a slow death. Yeah, they have done that. No question about that. They were also involved in expelling Eritreans from Ethiopia, taking their property, etc., etc. And now my question is this intervention then in revenge? Or are we intervening because there are benefits that we can acquire, benefits to the nation that we can acquire by our intervention? If it is just revenge, I think it is not productive, okay? So revenge is not a strategic national interest. The strategic national interest is one that looks forward and looks for what benefits are there for the country. Not what can I do to enemies that wronged me in the past, because that's, so what do you gain by attacking them for their past ills or for the past wrongs that they did to you? There is nothing that you can benefit in for the future, okay? So basically what I'm arguing is national interest is forward looking. What is in it for the country? What benefits do we derive from intervening? Not simply how severely can we punish our enemies of the past. That's why I said the TPLF out of power in Ethiopia is not the same TPLF that was in power in Ethiopia. Okay, its ability to harm Eritrea was greatly reduced by losing power in Ethiopia. And in fact, because they were under pressure from the federal government, they were trying to find some way of rapprochement with Eritrea, to mend relations with Eritrea. So I think a national, strategic national interest is forward looking rather than trying to punish enemies for past wrongs. You are mute, Ngosom. I think you are mute.
Yeah.
We are going to take Samson as the last person, unless there are Desale listed questions. We were planning for this for an hour and a half, and we are almost there. So is there anyone? Samson is the last one, unless there are others who either wrote a question or raised their hand.
No, nobody
Okay.
raised their hand, Samson. I
Okay.
see. I don't see any.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, Samson will be the last one.
Okay, can I go?
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Okay, good. Of course, I had multiple questions, but I will try to pivot to one which I consider is important. Actually, the previous question is kind of a segue to my question. It is, you asserted that there was no threat to Eritrea from TPLF, and actually constructed that argument on the assumption or that the TPLF, after they were thrown out, were ousted from power, and they came to Maqale, they didn't have power, or they were not capable of being a threat to Eritrea. So I assume that you are talking about their military capability, or because the political will, they were still occupying sovereign Eritrean territory. From what we hear, 70–80% of the Ethiopian military arsenal was in their hand. This is a fact. Even General Tzadkan recently uttered, and the Ethiopian government, Dr. Abiy and others, usually mention this fact. So can you give us, I mean, some tangible evidence, information that you know that they were not capable to, they were not a real threat. They didn't have a military capability to attack Eritrea or to. I'm talking. Let's leave aside the political will and pivot to the military capability. Thank you.
Yeah. When I say that they were not in a position to be a credible threat to Eritrea, I don't necessarily mean that they did not have arms. But if you are to be a threat to attack Eritrea, for instance, when they are facing all the pressure from Ethiopia, I think that's seriously wrong on their part. Because mended relations with Eritrea could have given them access to the outside world. There are currently they are facing the Ethiopian forces, or the federal forces, and the Amhara forces and the Eritrean forces with minimal access to the outside world, even to import armaments and so on. So in other words, it would not be to their strategic interest when they are under pressure in Ethiopia to bring Eritrea into the war. Okay, that's against their interest, because their interest would be to build relations with Eritrea, Sudan, and so on. That would give them outlets so that they get their supplies, whether it is arms or other items that they need. So in other words, Tigray is isolated presently. In fact, it is incredible that they are able to fight with some success, it appears, without sustained outlet from which they can acquire supplies. So what I'm saying is, I'm not saying they didn't have the armaments. I'm just saying there is no will to threaten Eritrea in their conditions in 2020. Because it is strategically, it is not to their advantage, because friendship with Eritrea would actually secure them outlets. So you have to be thinking rationally and say, okay, why would they do this? Just because they have arms doesn't mean they are going to attack Eritrea simply because it is against their strategic interests. That's why I'm saying in 2020, their position was not, there was no reasonable strategic interest for them to attack Eritrea or to be a threat to Eritrea. In the long run, they might, who knows, after their pressure with Ethiopia, if it is elevated. But in 2020, when the intervention took place, they were not really a credible threat because that was not to their strategic interest. That's what I'm talking about.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kidane.
A quick follow-up.
Yes, please.
I mean, this defies logic. I mean, if they want peace with Eritrea, they could have accepted the Algiers agreement and gave Eritrea its rightful territories. So it doesn't reconcile what you're saying. Doesn't reconcile.
It's very hard to
yeah. What I'm saying is,
he was on mute.
What I'm saying is this defies logic, because if they wanted peace with Eritrea, they could have accepted that the Algiers agreement at least after 2018, and left and gave Eritrea its rightful territories, because this doesn't reconcile what you're saying and not accepting the Algiers agreement after 2018. I can't see it.
Yeah, let me try again. In 2018, when Eritrea and Ethiopia signed that friendship and cooperation agreement, the TPLF did not come out clearly and say, we're not going to allow the implementation of this boundary demarcation. They didn't say that. And I think that was a mistake on their part. But maybe they didn't say that because they didn't anticipate Ethiopia to attack them. What I am saying is, when it was clear that Ethiopia was going to attack them, then whatever position they had with respect to the border becomes secondary. Okay, saving themselves, protecting Tigray from the onslaught of Ethiopia was the primary objective. And so therefore, if when they were attempting, I mean, the Eritrean met Isaias, at least on a couple of occasions, trying to mend relations. If Eritrea at that time was clearly saying, okay, make your position clear with respect to the demarcation, we would have known what they would have decided. Okay, and I think at that point they would have said very likely that they were going to abide by the demarcation. I would assume a rational decision would be that. If they had said we are going to object, then of course the Eritrean regime would have gotten a reason, an obvious reason for intervention, and Eritrea could have claimed that it was not intervening, it was really fighting a just war because the TPLF was not abiding by the boundary decisions. So I think what I'm saying is Eritrea should have tested the waters and asked them for implementation of the demarcation of the boundary. And Eritrea never did that. And so therefore, we are now talking about whether the TPLF really would have hindered any demarcation of the boundary. We don't know, but to me, that would be illogical, unreasonable for them to do. And so therefore, I think their threat to Eritrea at that point was significantly diminished.
Well, that's, to be continued. There is no ending because there is always a time. I had myself a question, but this is the end of our seminar. We will do more. I mean, we are convinced that seminars like this energize our effort to educate ourselves. Lack of education is an enemy also. So it's our first time, and we'll do much, more. And thank you for coming. You made a commitment to be here. There are so many seminars and conferences this weekend, and but we have tried. So thank you very much. We appreciate, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for the informative presentation, Dr. Kidane.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Kidane. Have a good day,
Thank you.
people.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thomas,
Yeah,
Thank you, Dr.
You want-
Kidane. Thank
you
you,
want to stay?
Dr. Angasong.
yeah, sure.
Thank you
Mahali,
very
you want to
much.
stay? Thank you. Thank
Sure.
you. We will continue. Yeah. George, I'll call you. Okay.
The Sala might stop recording if we want to do a summary of our work.
Yeah.